Andrea. Welcome to the Teach Music Online podcast.
Hi, Carly. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, this is going to be so fun. I feel like we've been destined to do this because we have so many similarities. You also create courses for teachers and you have a podcast for music teachers, so we're going to have a great conversation.
That's right. Yes.
I read a little bit on your website about your kind of past as an entrepreneur and your desire to always create an income through, in a variety of ways from a young age. I just think it's so interesting talking to other entrepreneurs. So tell me a little bit about growing up and what inspired those different businesses for you.
Yeah. I don't really know where it came from. My parents have often wondered, like, where did she get this? Because they're both engineers, electrical engineers. So I did not get my entrepreneurial genes from them. Um, but yeah, I think it might have started because I liked office supplies when I was very young. And I know my first business was born out of wanting business cards. And I was like, well, if I have business cards, I need to have like a job title and such. And I was probably 7 or something when I was doing this. So I wanted business cards. So I invented a Andrea's cards made quick. And I started doing desktop publishing and I would make
That's
like
so cute.
greeting cards and invitations and canning jar labels and whatever. I mean, this was dating myself, but like, before everyone could use Canva to make pretty things for themselves. Um, yeah, so it's just always been there. I don't know where it came from. I read a lot of books about it when I was little and was always starting new businesses. But probably the most significant for me was when I was in middle school. That's when I kind of started taking piano more seriously. And I thought, okay, I want to open a music school. That's kind of when that dream was set. And then the thing that clinched the deal was my freshman year of college. I actually ran a house painting business for that summer, and it was kind of an internship, but in the like loosest definition of the term internship. So it was more run like a franchise where they had college students who were branch managers, and we each had a territory that we could market in to run our house painting businesses. And we hired painters and trained painters, and spring break was spent learning how to paint houses, um, and we did all the estimates and all the sales and all of that. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Really demanding workload, especially while still being in school, freshman. Um, but it broke me, and I was like, I love this. I love working this hard, and I want to do it for myself. So I knew entrepreneurship was the path for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like you were dabbling in it, but also realizing maybe not this specifically, but you wanted to create a business for yourself. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, just had to be that way.
Yes. So, we both know that as a studio owner, there are so many pieces. There are so many hats a teacher has to wear. And so it's no surprise that running a music studio is a challenge
Mhm.
and that no teacher is perfectly equipped with everything they need, right out of the gate. Like if they start teaching in high school, especially. But
Mhm.
even right out of college, teachers don't have all of those business skills that they need to market and be successful and be organized. So, just tell us a little bit about some of your favorite topics for helping studio owners.
Yeah, I am really into systems and processes. I love developing uh, systems. I mean, for myself, that just makes something that's important to me be sustainable. So it can be, I value having my dishes washed every night. And so I have a system in place for that. On the business side, it's I value having a low stress tax season. So I have systems in place throughout the year to systems and routines to keep on track of all my accounting so tax season isn't busy. So that's one area that I really can nerd out about. Another thing is the finance side and accounting too, using finances strategically. Um, I've been self-employed since right out of college. So, graduated, worked really hard to manage my finances in that time so I could buy a house right away, started a music school right away. And it was not because I had a lot of money, it was because I used what I had very strategically. So, I'm very passionate about that. And then on the accounting side, just helping. I do have a business background. I studied both entrepreneurship and piano performance. So I like taking what I learned from business school and bringing the useful parts to music teachers.
I love it. And I love that talking about this helps us all remember that finance doesn't need to be a scary topic. Unfortunately, many marriages fail because finances are not talked about.
Mhm.
Or even just before you're married, if you don't ever address your finances, you're kind of just living in this abyss of I don't know what's going on with my money until I need to look at my account because, oh no, I have a credit card statement coming up. But there are so many positive ways to look at it and think about it. And today we're talking about taxes and tax season and what a fun, in quotes, time of year it can be. And honestly, like running my own business, my husband and I are also self-employed. We've been that way since almost, yeah, since we were married, really. And it forces you to look at it differently, to have a plan in place because you're paying yourself. So it's a little differently. And as studio owners, we need to be aware of it. I recently did a webinar all on setting bigger financial goals and helping teachers see like you can hit goals if you set them. So
Mhm.
let's talk about taxes today.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. And I think we chatted about this, but disclaimer to everyone that we are not we are not like tax experts. We can't do your taxes for you, but because we've been helping teachers and doing our own taxes, we have a few tips that I think teachers will appreciate. So I think a couple of topics. The first one is maybe LLC or S Corp. When someone asks you what they should look at, what would you recommend to them?
Mhm. Yeah, well, first, I think there's some like misunderstanding about this LLC S corp distinction because the LLC is almost more of it's a legal structure for the business, and you can be an LLC that's opts to be taxed as an S corp, or you can just be an LLC. So there is there's like a little distinction there that's not often addressed. So just to bring that up, um, and then the big difference is the way your you're treated, like your own personal income comes out of the business. If you're whether you're an LLC or a sole proprietor, you pay taxes on all the business profit, and then you pull your earnings out of the profits of the business. As if you opt to be taxed as an S corp, your you pay yourself as an employee. So you've got some overhead
Right.
there with payroll, like you'll need to probably use a payroll service and things like that. So there's some extra expenses, extra paperwork, all of that. But it can be a tax benefit because of what of your business income you pay that 15.3% self-employment tax on it. It reduces that amount of taxable
Right.
income. So it's like an optimization exercise.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say no matter the size of your studio, it's great to have an accountant to explain this to you in detail because the way we were explained it when we were setting ours up was there's a certain point of income where an S corp will be more valuable to you because your taxes look a little different, and because of the deductions you could be taxed the amount of tax you're paying is less than it would be if you were an LLC with the same income. So there's kind of that point, and I don't want to say any numbers because I'm not sure exactly what it is, but there is a point where you would want to switch over to an S corp so that you can save a little bit on your taxes.
Yeah, and it takes some predictability too, because once you're in that, um, I'll say some numbers, but keep in mind they're very general, and you would want to plan for this in advance. But roughly $40,000 of net profit from your studio, or income greater than $100,000 is like when that conversation might be happening. Um, and but one of the tough things about it, or like why you want to give this thought, is that you have to opt into that tax designation for 5 years, and you have to be able to consistently draw an income for yourself. So you might even hit those thresholds and say, oh, but you know what, I think I'm going to drop down to part-time next year because I don't know, my mother-in-law is coming to live with us or something. For any reason you might decide to change that. So even if you're meeting those thresholds, sometimes it doesn't make sense just because of the other intricacies of that tax
Yeah, that's an
designation.
interesting thought. I had forgotten about that. That's good to bring up.
Yeah.
So you need to kind of forecast, like have a forecast for where you're going with your business.
Yeah, but definitely if you're like nearing those thresholds, I would say have the conversation with someone who can look at your taxes specifically,
Yeah.
and don't rely on other music teachers to give you guidance on this because they can't.
Yeah.
There's so
Yeah.
many variables and
Yes. And I remember someone gave us such great advice, years ago, maybe 10 years ago, who just said, you do have to pay your accountant, but you will save because they will help you with your expenses, and they know often sometimes there are government deductions during the year that you're not aware of. Especially during COVID, there were some
Mhm,
special circumstance things that are hard to figure out on your own. So an accountant is going to save you time and ultimately money, which was like done.
mhm, yep.
It's worth having that kind of safety net.
For sure.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about expenses. It's so important to know what your expenses are and know what you can deduct as a studio owner, because then it makes your taxable income less. So you will pay less on your taxes. So let's talk about, for both of us, you can go first. How do
Sure.
you document your expenses?
Yeah, I've done it many ways over the years, depending on the level of my studio. When I was in high school, it was an Excel document that I kept track of expenses in. Now I do use accounting software. Um, Again, I come from a business background, so that was not new software to me to use. I know that it's a new system to learn for music teachers. I do think it's worth it if you are inclined that way. Um, but I have lots of clients I work with who use, my music staff bonds, some studio management software to do that expense tracking. I always say use the tool that you're actually going to use, not the one that you're going to resist and not take advantage of. So yeah,
Right.
personally, I use
Yeah.
accounting software, QuickBooks, and Wave.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I love Wave. I use Wave apps. And for those listening who don't know what some of this software can do for you, you basically connect it to your checking account or your credit card accounts or all of them. And you can designate transactions to be in certain expense categories. So, for example, every time you purchase from a specific music store, it'll automatically see that and put it in that bucket of a music or an office supply expense, as that's
Hmm.
what you've chosen to send it to. So at the end of the year, you can look at all those categories and quickly see your expenses. Now, you still will have to go back through. I always do, to be safe, and double check everything to make sure it's putting them in the right categories. Like sometimes you'll get gas and it'll put it in the wrong category because it's like a weird name or something. But it's still helpful and it learns with you over time.
Hmm. And something that came up, I've got a finance course running right now, and someone asked the question. I switched to I started using a business bank account midway through the year and credit card and things like that. So all my transactions post June are under the business. But before June, I had all these expenses that were on my personal card. What do I do with that? And that's where you can still track all those in your studio management software. But accounting software does give you kind of an edge there because you can say, I bought this on a personal card and keep it like linked to your keep it designated as a personal purchase that you made into the business. So there's just like a little more definition in that accounting software can offer if you decide to go that way with expense tracking.
Yes, I love that. Yes. Something that I like to do is look at all of my expenses and find the ones that are auto renewal for the year or monthly. And I have a separate spreadsheet that lists out each service when it renews and what I pay per year for that service. So, for example, Canva is one that I pay for
Mm-hmm.
yearly. Spotify is something we pay for yearly. Zoom, you pay monthly. I mean, there are several, once you start thinking about it, that qualify as business expenses that you'll want to know when they renew and how much you're spending. Those are ones you don't really have to track in accounting software the same way because you already know you're spending $90 a year on Canva, or maybe it's Calendly or your website service that you pay for, $16 a month. Like, they add up, but it's okay because they're business expenses and it's just good to have them written out so that you can see them.
Mm-hmm.
While we're on the topic of expenses, let's talk about what you can expense. So what are the different categories that teachers should be thinking about? Some might be new to running a business, having a studio. What are some that they can realize could be deducted?
Sure, so many things. Some of the benefits of being a business owner, even yeah, like percentages of your cell phone. If you use that for business, you probably use it for personal also. But if you can justify that use it 20% of the time for business, that's a tax deductible business expense. Home office deductions, uh, there's some stipulations with that, but for sure, if you've got a piano taking up space in your living room that you use for teaching, absolutely can be used as or deducted. Mileage is one that I don't think we always appreciate, especially the non-traveling teachers. Still, can it's just like free money, really. Um, and this past year, I think the mileage rate reimbursement rate for the first half of 2022 was 58.5 cents, and then it went up because of inflation. It was so great that it was higher, 62.5 cents per mile for the second half of last year. So that means if you're driving 100 miles, there's you get to write off $62.50 for those 100 miles, meaning you don't have to pay tax on that $62.
Right. Can I
So
ask a question
yeah,
with that? I'm trying to remember, is it either mileage or money you've spent on gas?
yeah, you can either do like track all your expenses that you spend on your car. So your oil
Hmm.
changes and all that, and then do a percentage of the miles that you drove for business versus
Yeah.
personal. That's always seemed like more overhead to me. I haven't been a traveling teacher. For an
Yeah.
exclusively traveling teacher, that'd probably be worth like testing 1 year to see if it's worth the
Hmm.
extra overhead
Hmm.
of tracking. But for a teacher who's driving maybe just 200 miles a year, to their MTNA meetings and the occasional competition, or
Right.
a coffee meetup with another teacher, or a conference, all that kind of random stuff,
Hmm.
the standard mileage deduction is really not that cumbersome to figure out, even after the fact. Thank you, Google Maps. And if you keep track of your appointments, you can go back and recreate those mileage reports.
Yeah, and maybe now that teachers know that, you can keep a note on your phone when you do have those expenses and you can just quickly jot it down. I know that's great in
Mhm.
theory. It's harder to actually do, but if you plan it, maybe it can be easier.
And I said at the beginning, one of my things is routines and habits. And I I have a money date with myself, like on Friday afternoons or Saturday mornings. This is my time that I spend to just capture all those things. So I'll look back at my calendar and I'll look at any travel driving I might have done that was related to business. Make sure that's tracked in a spreadsheet. I'll look at, any Amazon orders I made that need to be tracked. Just I have one set time each week that I kind of capture it all at once.
That's so good. I've started doing whenever I make any purchase, I have a note on my phone that I have different categories and I just quickly like the date, what it was, and which category it goes under. And it's good for a couple of reasons. I like before I make a purchase, I'm like, "Ah, do I really want to write this down?"
That's great. Yeah.
Like they did in the olden days when you had a checkbook or you had you had a running log. Like I can remember my parents had one, and especially my grandparents,
Uh-huh.
like they tracked everything. And I think unfortunately because of the ease of credit cards and like we've got our payments set up to every single service online, so it's so easy to just autofill the card and make the purchase. But it really does help, like with any purchase for clothing or for whatever it is, like, okay, stop, let me think about this for 24 hours, and then if I forget about it, I don't need it.
So like intentionally building in some friction.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yes, yes. Or like, I will have to tell my husband about this because we're going to go over this. Do I want to try to explain or justify? Now, I would also suggest, like, as a partnership, to have flexibility in what to have a budget that's huge. Like, yeah, you have this amount you spend on you and you have this amount you spend on you. Like, absolutely, because we should enjoy our lives. But I think it also is a good check and balance.
Yeah.
What other categories should we be thinking about?
Yeah, professional development. Teachers are in your community and spend money on that monthly, and that's a great business expense. Anything if you're spending money on music studio licenses, for sure. Music that is part of your own music library, not music that a student would reimburse you for, because then you're getting income when the student reimburses you, so that kind of cancels out. But music that's for your studio library, instruments, instrument maintenance, all the gear you bought to teach online, the extra webcams and mic stands and things. Really anything that you would not have bought if not for your business.
Yeah. So all the
That's
subscription services online,
all
which
subscription.
those add up, any music apps that you're using for
Hmm.
students, or that you purchased, one-time purchase, those are all things that absolutely you should be deducting.
Yeah. And even music for yourself, if it's, justifiable as like, I needed this music to play this gig, or it's part of my studio library now, it's accessible to students. Um,
Yes.
Studio decor, if you are buying a new rug for your studio for underneath your instrument or chairs, that can be a deductible expense.
Yes.
Um,
What are some other common questions you get during this time of year? I can think of a few, but what are some that you've had from teachers? They come to this March, April time and they're getting a little bit of friction with wanting to do, not wanting, but needing to do their taxes.
YouTube taxes. Yeah. Do I have to? Do I have to pay
Yeah.
taxes? That's a common one, and probably yes. Unfortunately, um, there are income thresholds for that too. But if you, yeah, and if do I have to pay taxes on income I received as cash, or can I just kind of let that slip into my bank account without documenting it? And unfortunately, the answer to that is no. The IRS wants to know about everything. So whether it came as cash or check or credit card payment or um, Bitcoin or even muffins, if you bartered, for lessons, even that is technically um, taxable income. The value of the muffins that were bartered. Um, yeah, so that's probably the biggest one is do I have to? And then there's a lot of fears about paying quarterly taxes, and um, I just like to assure people that it's not that terrible,
Yeah,
It's a
and
little
and it's
daunting the
it's
first time, but
education. It's education. It's taking a moment to educate yourself around what's expected and finding the right forms and then putting an alert in your calendar, right? It's not like, ooh, am I going to get in
Mhm.
trouble?
Yeah, yeah. And if you have any fears about what you maybe didn't do last year that you think you should have, just set them aside. Don't worry about it. Just take the next step forward because
Hmm.
there's always a way out. And tax preparers can be very helpful in that situation. Just like set you at ease, figure out where the baseline is and reset, and just I would say don't hold on to that fear and let that
Yeah.
keep you from taking a positive step towards just getting on the right track with that.
Yes. Do your teachers that you work with have any specific software they do their taxes in, or are most of them using an accountant?
I'd say it's a mix. Personally, I've used TurboTax, which is
Hmm.
great. My tax situation got really complicated, and so I I made it when I first started. I wanted to know how my taxes were working. That was really important to me to understand them, so I could make decisions based on like how to optimize those taxes. And so I did them for I don't know 10 years or something, and then my between my husband and I, we have several businesses and rental properties, and we
Mm.
moved states. And one year it was just like so ridiculously crazy. I think I manage books for 4 LLCs right now, so it was just like a lot. And anytime I had a weird question, it would be a 2 hour rabbit trail of
Yeah.
googling and trying to read tax code and see, does this apply to my situation? Or does this? And
Right.
at that point, I was like, you know what? I can call a tax preparer and they can answer my question in 15 minutes. And that's where the value really came back to me in terms of the cost of my time to sleuth out answers. I could
Yeah.
do it, and it didn't make sense anymore. It took time away from my businesses.
Yes, and I would say a lot of teachers listening are thinking about either running courses or they're
Mhm.
gigging or they're looking at other means of income as a musician. And at that point, I would say if you ever feel like, oh, I don't know about doing that because I don't know how to set it up, or I don't know like who to ask about how to handle the money from this, like at that point, I would say you're right. Like when you have those
Mhm.
questions, I think it's worth it to find somebody that can help.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And there's no shame.
Yes, not at all. No, not at all. Well, this is so good. So, I actually now that we're talking, I'm thinking, why don't we talk just a little bit about planning out a year of your finances for your studio and like setting some goals as a studio owner. Do you have any tips for somebody who's looking at their year and maybe they're thinking like, "Oh, last year I didn't do a good job." What should they be, thinking about mentally moving forward so that they can have a better year financially and be more aware of their spendings?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a great
And I
question. I
know you
haven't.
have tons of you have like a course on this and lessons a ton. So that was, you probably have a ton to say, but what comes to mind for the teacher who's just, wanting to dabble in that and think about it?
Yeah. Okay. Let me think of the different teachers. So I think of a beginning teacher who's just starting out, or maybe someone who's in a different career wanting to transition to teaching. For that teacher, I would say focus on like your personal budget, getting your personal budget in order, figuring out what you need, and maybe creating an aspirational budget, what you'd like, and then crunching the numbers to find out what it would take from your business to support those two levels of budget, especially if you're making a transition from maybe you're a school teacher wanting to become a private teacher. What does it take to replace your salary or something like that?
Hmm.
So that's where I'd start with that teacher. For the one who is already
But
running a private,
really quick, that was such a good point. For the teacher who's transitioning, I think it is so, so wise to be forecasting the numbers and thinking, okay, like my salary over here is X. I would way rather do this, and doing the math and
Mhm.
going, okay, well, how many students do I need and what should I be charging and what am I wanting? I always tell teacher do that math and say, okay, you how many students do you want to teach? What's your max?
Mhm.
Divide that by how much you want to make and how many months, and that tells you your rate you should be charging. So either you charge more or you got to shift your goals a little bit and say, oh, actually, I need to be teaching more students to ever hit that goal.
Or reformat lessons so you can target a higher monthly
Yes.
income per or average per student or something like that. There are lots of ways to like get those numbers higher, but you got to know what the target is to know
Yes.
what you're trying to hit. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you were going into the next teacher, maybe they've been teaching
Okay.
for a few years.
Yeah. So that teacher is probably I'd start with a financial review. Where have you been? What is it that is you're dissatisfied about? Is it you feel like you don't know what's happening? Is it a visibility question? Like, I don't understand my finances. In that case, the goal might be education,
Mm.
learning more about some area of finance. Or it might be more of a systems routine kind of thing. Like, I was disorganized this year and I want to be more organized. Um, there might not actually be a financial goal, it might be a supporting financial goal. I think the more organized you are with your finances and the more you know, naturally, it kind of tends to optimize itself. So
Yeah,
I think there's
yeah.
payoff to that anyway. So that'd be like a solo teacher who's been in it for a few years. And then certainly you can set the financial goals. I want 10% more this year. And then you're looking at
Yeah.
how do you hit that through teaching more students? Do you hit that through teaching group? All those questions. Um,
Yes.
and then for the multi-teacher studio, my brain has really been in this multi-teacher studio that place this last couple of months as I've been putting together this finance course. Um, because there, I think what I hear most often from multi-teacher studio owners is their studio just like isn't quite working and they don't know why. Um, it's like just not quite profitable enough. It's not quite
Hmm.
where they can step back from teaching and be full-time admin, or it's not quite to where they are able to offer competitive salaries to their
Yeah.
teachers to like really engage them. And
It's like creating
um,
more work than what they maybe thought when they were hiring.
yeah, yeah. And so there are lots of reflection questions there, like is what job do you want for yourself? Do you want the job of a multi-teacher studio owner who's doing a lot of administrative work? Were you happy being a solo teacher? Because you can do really well as an independent teacher, and
Yeah.
that you can do really well financially. Like the two shouldn't there's maybe more opportunity, but your job also very much changes when you're a multi-teacher studio owner. So
Yes.
some just personal reflection on what do you want out of your job. And then I think there's a lot of room for education in the multi-teacher studio owner model to really like understand how margins and things change. There's just so many more expenses with that model.
Mm,
And it just takes a lot more attention. Um, so
yeah.
that was
No,
kind of a lot.
that's no, that's so good. That's so good. And for teachers to realize, like, whatever stage you're in, there are ways to to strategize and to look differently and to create income. One thing I would add is really focusing on what you want as a teacher. Like, are you thriving teaching, but you're working too many hours?
Mhm.
That's maybe where we should create a hybrid of group lessons and one-on-one lessons. We have a teacher who does this and she's so excellent at it. She does two one-on-ones a month and two group lessons for each student. So she's able to kind of alternate those weeks, and the students get amazing value from it. And
Mhm.
she can in turn teach more, fit in more students. So there are just so many ways to be creative and to really dream big. And like you said, you might not have to hire other teachers to create that finance
Mhm.
goal.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And you just have to know yourself. Like no one can answer that question for you.
Yeah.
So yeah. And there isn't a right or wrong.
Oh, there is no right or wrong. And I think having resources like podcasts and YouTubing it or whatever it is and getting out of this traditional way of thinking is so helpful. One other thought, I know we're not going to talk a ton longer, but this is just so fun. And it's such an important topic. But one thought I'm thinking about is just encouraging teachers to try to stay debt free, and talking about what debt is good debt. Maybe it's your mortgage. Obviously, a mortgage is something you pay off over many, many years, and sometimes a vehicle is needed. We try to buy vehicles with cash. We are huge Dave Ramsey fans, and being living within our means. But do you have any thoughts around, either tips or reasons to stay out of debt as a business owner?
Yeah, I have talked a lot about this actually in like uh, when I've given presentations to college groups because that was something that was really important to me in college. And I would say I did it in college because it was like the right thing to do, not because I really understood. Like I kind
Mm-hmm.
of got it, but I didn't understand the impact it would have on my life. Um, and basically what it meant for me in college was I just worked hard, during college. And so I had the money to pay for the things I needed. And I see now how because I was debt free in college, I bought a house like a year after I graduated at the same time as I was starting a business. And
It's
looking back, I'm like, that
amazing.
was kind of crazy. And there were a lot of circumstances around that. Um, there was the housing crisis, which made
Yeah.
housing prices work in my favor, but it also meant I was starting a business during a financial crisis. So I'm sure my business sales weren't what they would have been in different years. So, there was,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
work with whatever circumstances you have at the moment. But
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I didn't quite realize until probably after the fact that that really made a difference. Since then, I think it's an education thing too, like knowing why you're taking on the debt. If you're a travel teacher and your car dies, it's probably worth it to take
Yeah.
that loan
Yeah.
because there's a return on the investment. Yes, you're going to pay loan payments and pay more for the car over time, but it makes possible earning this other income.
Yeah.
So I think like you said, there's good debt and there's bad debt, and there's debt that's worth it to take it on because of what it makes possible. And then there's debt like I just want to buy all the new furniture for my studio, and I'm going to
Yeah.
put it on a credit card just because I want it now. That's the bad debt kind of thing.
Yeah.
So um, really looking at is there is this a want or a need? And
Yes.
what does this make possible if I don't make this take on this debt, is that thing still possible? If I don't buy $5,000 of furniture, can I still start teaching? Probably yes.
Yeah.
Um, but I also encourage, like, I I am a generally debt-free person, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I don't want people to be short-sighted either when there is a good business reason to take on debt, like the
Great.
situation of the travel teacher. So it's understanding, there's not like a
Yeah.
black and white rule on that either, unfortunately, except for maybe
Yeah.
the want versus need part.
The yes, such good thoughts. I'm thinking about how we can dream and create differently when we are not strapped down by debt. Like 100%.
For
We
sure.
can spend more time in creation mode and not worry mode when we don't have that like long-term lingering thing looming. And my husband and I paid off a huge amount of debt in our first 3 years of marriage from my schooling at Berkeley. And I loved that I went there, but I didn't realize, I wasn't educated on what that actually meant. I think I
Mhm.
thought, well, maybe eventually my parents can help me pay it off, or maybe I'll marry a doctor. I don't know what I was thinking. Like, all I knew is it was a great, fantastic school that I got into. And anyway, we were still able to knock it out. And the freedom to then dream differently and to go, what do we want our lives to look like? What do we don't have to be tied to this thing. And now look at teachers. We can live anywhere and teach. We can create anything and make an income. Like, it is such an amazing world of entrepreneurship where you can take your skills and run with them. So we really can create that ultimate flexibility as business owners. But I think one thing that ties people down is kind of that heaviness of debt.
Yes, that is for sure true. I've like heard that echoed by many, many people. And especially when we're talking like consumer debt or
Mhm.
school debt that drags on and on and on and kind of
Yes.
haunts you for longer than it should. And maybe debt taken on when you didn't realize what was actually happening. And yeah, it does restrict opportunity. I think that's how I describe it. And so when I think of taking on intentional debt for yeah, these things like buying a piano because you have to
Mhm.
start. You have to start. You
Yes.
need a piano to start. So I see that so differently. And even the mental approach to it is different because you're coming in saying, I I'm making this decision because it's a step to this
Mhm.
next thing, not I don't know any other way, so I'm going to do this.
Yes.
Um, but for sure the mental freedom, that like weight of debt,
Yeah.
um, yes, I've heard
It's the
heard that
best. It's
echoed
the best
so
when you can get
much of
on
that.
the other side. Like,
Hmm.
on the other side of it, what doors it opens to you then in thinking about wealth and thinking about what you're creating for your future and the future of your family. It just feels and looks so differently. And I just wanted to mention that to give hope to those who aren't there,
Hmm.
that it's not far away. Like, it's not as far away as you realize or as you think. Finding really great resources that can help you is so empowering, and being able to speak about it with your partner or your spouse or whoever you're with is helpful, and I feel like only brings you closer together when you don't think that's going to be the case. It actually usually is, because the more vulnerable you are with people, your love grows.
Yeah. And like we talked about earlier with taxes, like if there's fear that's keeping you from
Yeah.
taking the next steps towards like figuring out what your tax situation is, same thing on this. Like this is way easier said than done, but like just remove the emotion from it and
Mm,
say this is not a judgment against me. This is not anything. This is
it's
this
just a
is a
number.
number. It's a number. We put other numbers against it. It goes down.
Yeah. It's a
And
spreadsheet. That's it.
it's a spreadsheet. Yeah, yeah.
That's all. It's a few less trips to Dairy Queen, but well, Andrea, thank you so much. This has just been really fun, and a kind of a different topic I don't talk about all the time. So thank you so much. Tell us a little bit more about your finance course and where teachers can learn more about that, because I know there's probably some listening who are like, I need to dive deeper.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't really mean to like plug that so much. It just was so
No,
aligned with
no,
what we were
you've been
talking about.
working on it. No, I want to know about it too.
Yeah, so I really um I'm doing the first round of this finance course now, and it's about split between multi-teacher studio owners and solo studio owners. And I would say it really is designed with the multi-teacher studio owner in mind. I saw
Mm.
so many teachers grow their studios to full capacity and then take that next step. Well,
Yeah.
take a next step to becoming multi-teacher studio owners. And sometimes I think that's presented as like the next thing. And so we already talked about it. It's not necessarily, it might be for you, it might not be. And either way, that's fine. But then there are just some really different things with the financial model of a multi-teacher studio, because you've got these teachers that you're wanting to pay, and you're probably wanting to pay well. And you just are working with to keep the business running with a much smaller percentage of the revenue that comes in.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're a solo teacher teaching out of your house, you get 100% of the revenue comes in and to you, and none of it goes to rent, none of it goes to utilities probably. And so you're just like really operating out of a really high profit looking business. And with a multi-teacher studio owner, usually like 50, 60, 75% of that just immediately gets wiped out. And it goes to the teachers who deserve it
Yeah,
for the
but
work
it
they're
looks
doing.
just so different. It looks
But you're
so
working
different.
with 25% of whatever
Hmm.
your tuition is. So those numbers just all of a sudden are very different looking. And so it was really I wanted to teach, like I said, I come from a business background. So I wanted to teach real business, finance, income statements, balance sheet, statement of cash flows, but explain it in a way that teachers like make sense for a multi-teacher studio owner. And I also want to empower teachers to be able to take those, like dream big and take those next steps.
Yeah.
So maybe you're looking at expanding from one location to three, or taking on an investor, or selling your business, and trying to make it attractive to someone who might want to buy it, and looking at profit margins and ROI and all these things, and how to just really strengthen the business model that underlies your whole business. So that's what that course gets into. It's super dense and super nerdy, but it's finance. I want you to be able to speak the language of finance, go into it, talk to a banker or investor, and hold your own in that financial
Yeah.
conversation.
Amazing. Well, I will link it so that teachers can look into that, because I know there are so many teachers kind of at that level where they're wondering what their next step is. So thank you so much. And thanks for sharing all of your knowledge today.
Thank you. This is a blast.